and I'm making the webinar live. Hi, good evening, everyone. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes for everyone to join in and then we can begin. Yeah, I think we should start. It's 7:31. We should start. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sudipta Satpathy, and I head the content at Fitterfly. I'm so glad that you all could make the time to join us this evening for another insightful webinar with our esteemed guests. If there's one thing that 2020 has taught us, it's that prevention is better than cure. But this philosophy not only holds true for COVID, but for all health related matters. If we proactively take the right precautionary steps at the right time, we can reduce the risk or delay the onset of many health conditions, including diabetes, prediabetes, or borderline diabetes, as it's also known, heart conditions, high blood pressure, and much more. But what are these precautionary steps? What tests should we do? And how do these tests tell us the status of our health? How often should we get them done? To answer all this and many more questions, I have two very special guests with me here today. Our first guest this evening is Dr. Om Lakhani, who is a consulting endocrinologist from Zydus Hospital at Ahmedabad and a winner of many prestigious awards throughout his academic and professional career. Welcome, Dr. Om. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Joining him is Fitterfly CEO and co-founder, Dr. Arbinder Singhal, who is also a super specialty gold medalist surgeon. Good evening and welcome, Dr. Arbinder.
Thank you, Sudipta.
Both of our guests today are highly passionate about making quality healthcare accessible to everyone, and it is a great pleasure that they're speaking to us today. Please feel free to leave all your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. Without further ado, let me pass on the virtual stage to Dr. Om and Dr. Arbinder.
Thank you, Sudipta. So, it's indeed a pleasure to talk to Om like this in front of public. Om gets invited to all the topmost endocrinology and health conferences across the globe. He speaks about technology. He speaks about very, I would say highly scientific things like how to manage diabetes in an advanced way or PCOS or hypothyroidism. But here he's going to take us through the very basics of where it all begins. And I'm very happy that he chose this topic, because anybody would get tempted to speak about something else. But I think with Om, he really wants to make a difference. So that's why I think he's going back to the basics and talking about preventive health. And as all of us, at least for me, as I enter 40s, now in mid 40s actually, suddenly the role of preventive health becomes very important. So not only for people who are attending this webinar, but for me at a personal level, it will be a very insightful conversation with Om today. So Om, so just take us through what you think of preventive health in general as an icebreaker, as a starter to this whole webinar.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Arvinder. So, what I'll say is in India, and pardon me for being blunt, but unfortunately, as far as healthcare is concerned, we don't have a preventive mentality. We don't. This is what I've learned in my practice. Years together, what I've seen is, जब आग लगती है तभी बुझाने जाते हैं, right? So, you would have seen a lot of patients with, hypertension landing up with a, stroke for the first time. Diabetic patients come to me when the sugars are 400 and they've been sitting on it for a long period of time. Now with COVID around, it's really a mess, because, you have these people who are at a higher risk, eventually of developing complications. any disease you take, we tend to kind of ignore it till a time where it becomes, completely to a situation where you cannot ignore it completely, right? I think it probably, kind of reflects our healthcare as well, because I think, at some point, and we talked about accessible healthcare, at some point we are probably not as accessible. Doctors are not as, because of, we have a large population, if you go to any doctor in Mumbai, I'm sure, your waiting time would be half an hour, 1 hour. And unfortunately, in our busy lives, we don't have that much time to spare. I think this is where I think we are in a situation where the tide will change because of technology. I think, and a lot of these, and nowadays, we do a lot of tele consultation, and we find patients, they just finish their work, they're sitting at home, and then they can, sitting at home, they can consult, a doctor. Things have become easier, and now people have started paying attention again to preventive aspects of healthcare. And I think it's the right time actually to talk about it. And like we said, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. And I think at this point of time, all we really need to talk about is prevention. And that's the key message here.
I think you are absolutely right from that spot on. And I think over the developed world also, it happened over a period of say 20-30 years, that the shift from reactive health to preventive health happens. So do you think that this is going to happen in the India in the next 10 years or so, or has the pandemic going to accelerate in a big way? What are your views on this?
Yeah, not only I think that it will happen, but I actually hope that it will happen, because we are, as we know, we are a huge population, and we never had, and we never will have an infrastructure for healthcare which is able to cater each and every one of us with a disease. But we do have an infrastructure in place, and we have a lot of systems in place where we can prevent the diseases from happening, right? But if let's say tomorrow everybody in Ahmedabad gets a COVID-19, no, we don't have beds for that. We don't, right? Entire Gujarat does not have beds for the number of patients we have who need to be treated in a hospital. So the best thing, the same holds for every disease under the sun in India. We don't have enough doctors to deal with diabetes in our country. We don't have enough doctors to deal with hypertension in our country. We don't have enough doctors to deal with heart problems in our country. So the best case scenario for our country is to really wake up to this challenge and try to reduce the burden on healthcare by preventing it and focusing more on preventive aspects rather than trying to, go to a treatment aspect. And I think the government also, if I see, the way the government is approaching, with so many yoga days and, other aspects, I think the government also kind of understands the situation that we are in the midst of a situation where if we don't prevent things, we are going to be in a big soup, because our healthcare cannot sustain diseased people. We cannot cater all of them in a way which we would really like to.
Absolutely right, and that is spot on. I think one of the studies is by ICMR 10 years back showed that Indians are one of the least physically active race. Now, I'm not talking about laborers, but I'm talking about people who are middle class upwards. We are physically not so active.
Yeah.
And with the availability of food and everything and decreasing physical activity, we have gone back to a state where we are more prone to a lot of other conditions. And another fact is that 30% of India is under 18 years of age.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the most productive population for the country in the next 20 years, the so-called demographic dividend, which we ideally should reap. But if even 10% of these get into chronic health conditions, then we won't be able to reap that dividend. And a lot of our GDP will get spent in treating these diseases rather than preventing it. So I think prevention is the key. And I completely agree with you. So now take us through the patient mindset. So you've been interacting with so many patients in Ahmedabad and all over the country. What are the kind of action sets, or what are the kind of patients you see? What kind of mentality goes around in prevention?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. If I classify all the patients that I see, who come for kind of preventive treatment, and essentially, if you see, diabetes mellitus per se, what we're doing is basically preventing, right? Now it's embedded, the preventive aspect is actually embedded. So when a patient comes to me, more often than not, I'm actually preventing a complication from happening or preventing a complication from worsening. That is quintessentially what endocrinologists essentially do. We are basically preventing a serious disorder from happening because of diabetes. So, when I see all these patients, there are 4 buckets in which I try to place this patient. If you create a 2x2 chart or 2x2 square, on one axis I'll put knowledge, and on the other axis I'll put efforts done to kind of correct the problem, right? So there are four groups. So one is the group which doesn't have the knowledge and is not interested in doing anything about it, right? So it's like ke sara sara, whatever happens will happen. I don't care, right? जब होगा तब देखा जाएगा, जब तक नहीं है, जब तक है जान, I'm living, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'll eat everything, I'll drink everything, and I'll have my merry time. When the problem strikes, when the lightning strikes, I'll choose a good doctor and I'll go to him or her, right? That's one group. Doesn't care, doesn't do anything, just, I think a lot of us, including me, tend to fall into this group to a lot of extent. Then you have this group which has the knowledge, right? Which understands the kind of, who often gets their tests done regularly. They often get, routine health checkups done, physical tests, everything is being done. They get everything done. They get the test done. They spend money on that. They spend efforts on that. But when the results come out, they are often in the denial and they don't do anything about it, right? So a lot of, and this is a very, very common trend. I think this is a very dangerous group actually. They spend money doing tests, but they don't take any action, which follows that, right? So we have seen, like, somebody gets this big booklet of tests which get done, and then there is this HbA1c which is in a pre-diabetic range, 6.3. They had a fatty liver. All these things are telltale signs. This person is going to develop diabetes unless you intervene at that point.
You can see the future on seeing their file.
Yeah, you can see the future, right? You can actually predict the future, and and it's going to happen. Not only that, you have data for that, right? And then they do nothing, and 1 year down the line, the same guy gets the routine test done. Now the HbA1c is 8, right? So you miss that opportunity, and then they want that diabetes reverse ho sakta hai ki nahi, we don't want medicines, we don't want this, we don't want that. Well, that was possible when 1 year back we could have done everything then. So that is one group which takes efforts to test but doesn't take effort to correct it. Simple lifestyle measures could have helped, that kind of thing. Then you have this group which doesn't get anything tested but makes efforts to live a healthy life. It's a good kind of patient, but I think still there are certain things you should like to check at regular basis. So they would eat healthy, they'd sleep well, they would work out, they'll keep themselves busy, have a good lifestyle, but at the same time they feel that they are invincible because they do everything right, and then don't get things tested, which unfortunately the reality is that even if you're the most healthiest person, if you do everything right, sometimes bad genes, environment, whatever factors, you might end up with a disease which you could have, if you're tested early, probably prevented it. And the fourth group is where I want all of us to be there. That is, who knows everything, tests everything, and then takes corrective action at the right point of time. I think that's the best group for any disease under the sun, right? Whether you're dealing with diabetes or hypertension, or on the other spectrum, cancer or anything, any disease, if you know the disease early, if you detect it early, and if you take the right step at the right time, right, I think you prevent a potential catastrophe from happening. And I think if done right, I think that is the group where I think the entire buckets should get filled by, should fill that bucket, because that's the one which will make our country healthy, right? The right test and the right correction for that.
Now that brings us to a very important question then, Om. So if our goal is to move everybody from no knowledge, no action to good knowledge and good action, the strategy has to be twofold. One is to, make people aware, which this webinar is also a part of the activity like that. And, thanks for taking out the time and bringing in these 4 categories. Now, next time I sit in my clinic, I'll be able to put the patient with category lies in this category. So, let's talk about a bit about preventive tests. I think there's a lot of noise. And if you go to any small hospital, large hospital, lab chain, they will offer you 200 tests in 900 rupees or 100 tests in 500 rupees. So what's your take on, so let's try to classify this, one is what are the preventive tests for the general population, which they should do. Second is if you have a certain kind of health condition or certain kind of risk for it, say diabetes or hypertension or heart disease, then what are the tests? So how do we decide which are the tests to be done?
Okay. First, I'll deal with this trend of getting this, what is known as a full body checkup, right? That's what it's called in Ahmedabad. I don't know what's it, there are different names there.
It's no less anywhere.
No less, right?
Yeah.
So you have this, like I said, you have a booklet of investigations, right? Where everything has been done, right? Including lead levels and cadmium levels and gold levels in your body. To very essential tests like your HbA1c.
Well, gold you cannot argue against in India.
Yeah, we're fine. I'm fine if I have gold in my body, right? So, well, I would like to really extract that also if I can. So, the point being, there are a lot of these labs, there are a lot of these, diagnostic chains, which have cropped up across the country, which offer so many tests at so many costs. Now you have this online network which does the same, so you have all these online companies, I'll not name them, but which they are, and they offer these preventive health checkups. And I think they do a little better job because they also explain, what are the implications of every test. This, I've seen some of these reports and they're really nice. They're better than what it used to be. But I think the key point is not everybody needs all the tests, right? For example, I have seen, men being tested for estrogen level. Now, women being tested for testosterone is fine because it has certain health implications. Men being tested for estrogen, fine. And then you are doing also progesterone in men, which I think is pushing the limit, right? So I think, just to kind of fill the time or fill the pages, getting too many tests done, which serve no purpose, it doesn't make sense. And now, we are in an AI driven world, right? I mean, when I'm looking for Google, let's say I'm searching for a new car, I'm not going to, go and get the pamphlets of all the cars available in the world, right? I'm going to be, selective. I need a small car. I need a diesel car. I need this and that. I have my parameters set, and depending on that, Google will turn out with an option, right? So the point is that we need to be smart and we need to be selective of what tests are needed. The contrary to that is you have this entire booklet of tests, but the test which is really needed, which is really essential for that age, and which is essential for preventing a disease, that test is not done, right? Which is very sad. I mean, the patient is in that, or the person is in that framework that I have got a full body checkup done, whereas the essential test, which was essentially required for that particular age, or certain diseases which are common in certain people, I think that test is not done at all. So my idea is, and I hope in future, we have better AI driven models, but at this point of time, we know certain things, we know a lot of things about prevention, and why don't we use this to to perform tests which actually have a meaning, which actually can prevent a disease, which actually can predict a disease, right? Instead of doing tests which have absolutely no implication in general human being, right? So my appeal to these lab chains and to the diagnostic chains is this: be smart, right? So instead of doing 10 tests for heart, why don't you do one test for the heart, which will give you more information, right? Instead of doing 15 tests for diabetes and its related complication, do one test which will save the money and will also give us more information and insights into the patient, which and we can do predictive things, which can prevent the things, right? So I think the point being that you need to be smart and you need to be selective about what test you need to do, and then those tests should be performed according to the age, sex, and the health status and the overall risk factor for that person or for that community, right? So that's the broad idea. So I think in the rest of this talk, I think we'll focus on the specifics, but I think in a broad general sense, and that's the idea of this entire discussion here. It should be smart about which test you select, right? And even the diagnostic chains, they should be smart about which test they should include in their diagnostic protocol, and which is really going to help the patient and reduce morbidity and mortality, and pick up disease at an early time.
Well, you will get a lot of questions now because everybody will send, I'm 45 years of age, I'm male, and I have family history of diabetes. What test should I do? So I'll start with myself home.
Yeah.
So I'll take a free consultation now from you.
Absolutely.
I'm 45 years of age. I have strong family history of diabetes. My BMI is normal. I'm fairly active, I think. What kind of annual or a preventive health checkup you'll recommend for me?
Okay, so let's broaden this and let's take a demographic of a male who is between the ages of, let's say, 25 to 50, right? Let's put that age group, right? That's a typical working male population. who would be very similar to the profile of yourself or myself. I think that's the kind of people who let's talk about them first. So I think when you say if you see the guidelines, if you see American Diabetes Association guidelines and all, they often say that they have a particular checklist of who should be tested for diabetes, right? And there are two important things there. One is family history of diabetes, which you rightly said, it's a very important history point, which I would really look for. Second is ethnicity, right? Now, when you're American, ethnicity matters because Asian, South Asian would have a different risk than a African American versus a white Caucasian, right? So the risks are different there. But if you talk about our ethnicity, the South Asian ethnicity is automatically kept at a higher risk, right? And we are all South Asian, thing. So if you try to fit ourselves in the ADA guidelines for testing, we all should be tested, right? That is quintessentially what it really means, right? We should all be checked for diabetes. And as far as family history is concerned, who really does not have a family history of diabetes, right? Everybody does, right? My grandmother was diabetic. Thankfully, my father isn't. But you still have somebody in the family who has diabetes. It's very, very common. Often a first degree relative, sometimes, or at least if not a first degree, at least a second degree relative would be there. If not, I think probably they don't know that they're diabetic. So often, you have this problem. So let's focus on the metabolic aspect. And there are a few tests. If you talk, let's take organ specific. Now let's take the heart first, right? Now, if I had limited budget, right? If I was, small amount of money, and I want to do one test for the heart, right? Now, if you go to a cardiologist, he'll tell you 10 things, right? He'll say, get a ECG done, get a echo done, get a TMT done, get a angiography done, get all these things done, right? I think the best test, of course, which is free of cost, is to measure your blood pressure, which is very important. A lot of people don't realize that blood pressure is still a very, very important, diagnostic or an important predictive marker of heart as well as heart disease as well as stroke, right? So if you are hypertensive, and that's the reason why we treat hypertension and give a lot of attention to that. But if I had to do one test, right, and that's a very interesting test, which is very cheap, not very effective, not very expensive, and very, very effective as a diagnostic tool, is something known as a CT calcium score, right? Now, look it up on the internet. You can talk to your doctor, you can talk to your diagnostic laboratory and all. I think talking about CT calcium score is very important at this point of time, because a lot of us are getting HRCTs being done already for COVID, right? So we get HRCT done for COVID, or for patients are being screened for that. A CT calcium score is just a simple software which is installed into the embedded over and above the CT software, CT scan software. It's already there. In fact, a lot of these companies already provide that software, which is inbuilt, right? It's a simple non-contrast chest CT scan from which they take the calcium levels which are there in the arteries, and they calculate the calcium score, and it gives you a number, right? Just like you have the cholesterol values or the sugar values, you get a number. And the number it could be anywhere between 0 to thousands, right? So you get a value. And the higher the value, the higher the risk you are of having a heart disease. It's a simple arithmetic. And just to again make it very simple, if that CT calcium score is more than 100, your risk of having a heart disease is 10 times that of a normal population. Okay. Just a simple thing. And if it's more than 100, it's also indication for starting a cholesterol medication, which is known as statins, right? The simple arithmetic for that. So I think, of all these tests, and they've done a lot of, in heart, there is a lot of predictive things being done, right? What test will tell you about things. At this point of time, currently, the highest predictive value amongst all the tests, including your lipid profiles, including your TMTs, including your echo, ECG, whatever, the highest predictive value for incidence of a heart disease is actually a CT calcium score, right? And like I said, yeah, and it's fascinating. And a simple non-contrast CT scan would hardly cost you $3,000. I don't think it would be costing more than that. In fact, if you do it at a mass scale, you might even get it cheaper, because when you give a CT calcium score, you don't even need to give the films for that. You just give a report, right? Which is very, very inexpensive, right? And there are studies from a lot of these Scandinavian countries what they've done is for patients who are referred for a regular chest CT scan, they actually did a CT calcium score as an add-on to that, right? So I sent the patient for a HRCT for COVID, but the radiologist was proactive and also did a CT calcium score and reported it back to the, just like, if I'm doing an ultrasound abdomen, I'm looking for the gallbladder. But if I find something in the kidney, I just report it, okay, there is probably a cyst in the kidney, right? So it's something like that, right? So, I think the radiologists also need to be proactive with this. And I think probably, it would be a good idea that as a standard protocol, let's start reporting the CT calcium score of all of our patients. It just takes another 5 minutes for the process to happen, right? So I think that's one test as far as the heart is concerned. And if you've not got it done, Arvinder, I think that's one which is going to be really useful, right? So that's
I have a family history of heart disease also, so probably I should get it done.
Yeah. So that's
And for diabetes,
and that holds true for women as well, right? So especially postmenopausal women, because before menopause, of the same demographic, it was women. Generally, their risk of heart disease is much less. But if you talk about postmenopausal, that is after the age of 50, right? 52 is an average in India. It's only about 47. So after menopause, the risk of heart disease progressively increases. And I think, again, these women should get a CT calcium score done, right? So that's one test for the heart, right?
bang for buck.
Bang for the buck, right? Then as far as diabetes is concerned, right? Of course, the most standard test is what is known as the oral glucose tolerance test. That's the most sensitive. When I say sensitive, it detects most patients, right? That is what is known as a sensitive test. So oral glucose tolerance test, unfortunately, is a very tedious test. You have to go in a fasting state, then you have to give one sample, then you have to take 75 measured grams of glucose. If you ever had a 75 gram of glucose, it's not very pleasant to take. We love.
It's like 15 spoons of sugar.
Yeah.
So or 3 cans of Coca-Cola.
Yeah, and that's a standard test also done for gestational diabetes. And if you ask these women who have been screened for that, they'll say, never again. I'm not going to do that again. Right?
Are they saying that to pregnancy or GDT?
I think both. So that's a standard test. But I think a smarter test would be to do an HbA1c. Right now, an HbA1c is basically what we call it as a 3-month average sugar. Right now, the HbA1c, the good thing is that the test has become more standardized. You have labs offering better kind of the sensitivity, specificity, a better quality of tests. Right. So an HbA1c, I think that doesn't require fasting. It can be done at any point of time. So you can walk in a lab and you can do it. It tells you not just the momentary sugar, but it also tells you the average over the last 3 months. Right. And again, from a diagnostic point of view for a doctor, it makes more sense to interpret an HbA1c rather than interpret a momentary sugar value, which may or may not have any meaning, right? Yeah. So just like, if I say which batsman is better, right? Now, if you say Vinod Kambli, if you talk about Mumbai specific, Vinod Kambli scored 2 or 3 double centuries in his career, but he's not considered a great batsman because overall his batting average is not that great. But if you take Sachin, he's probably had 1 or 2, double centuries in Test cricket, but I think his average is much better, right? And he's considered a great of cricket. So same way, your momentary sugar may be on the higher side, but if your average is what we're looking for, that makes sense to do an HbA1c as a diagnostic test. And just for people to listen, get sort of self knowledge about that, HbA1c value between 5.7 to 6.4 is considered pre-diabetic, what is also known as category at increased risk of diabetes, and more than equal to 6.5 is considered to be diabetic, right? So that's the cutoff for diagnostic point of view, right? And so this is one test. If you don't want any other test, it costs again $200-300 in any good lab, right? Again, best value for money. I think that's one test I would consider doing for diabetes. Okay. Let's then again, take a couple more organs. For example, let's say if I want to do a test for the kidney. Okay. So again, we all get creatinine done, but creatinine increases only when the kidney problem was already set in, right? So it's like, when the creatinine is high, it's already probably too late, right? You cannot prevent that. You already are in the zone of kidney problem. But one test which will predict the onset of a kidney problem many years before it happens is what is known as a urine albumin creatinine ratio. Again, a simple urine test, doesn't require any specific thing. Single sample has to be taken, right? And that itself can predict the risk of developing kidney problem. And also for the doctor, if you're already having diabetes or hypertension, high blood pressure, then that would give useful insights to the doctor to help you prevent that kidney disease from happening in the future, right? So urine albumin creat ratio, UACR, what is it's known as, you can again check with your lab. It's also known as urine microalbumin in some of the labs. So you can get this test done. Very cheap, simple, effective, and very, very high predictive value. And finally, I'll take one more organ, is the liver, right? And we all get fancy tests done for liver. You know, I've seen people get, fibro scans being done. I mean, great. I mean, if you have money to spare, fine. But I think just if you had to do one test, you just do your SGPT and SGOT, right? And again, don't always, this is another common problem. Don't always rely on the lab reference ranges which are given, right? That's the problem, because these reference ranges don't catch up with the data which is being generated every single day. And typically the current, if you talk about the hepatology and the liver specialist guidelines, SGPT value, right, more than equal to 30 in men and more than 19 in women is considered to have these people are considered to have fatty liver, right? Also known as NASH, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? So that value, again, it's not that you're going to develop a liver disease, the next day, but perhaps it means that it's a wake-up call, it's an alarm call, right? You wake up, work on your lifestyle, lose weight, and you will be able to reverse your fatty liver, right? And what studies have also shown is that if you have fatty liver, your risk of developing diabetes is almost certain, right? So those who are having fatty liver are almost certain to develop diabetes in the next 10 years or 15 years or so on, right? So again, it's a warning sign for us to take a step back and intervene on that, and perhaps prevent what is otherwise inevitable.
Wow, fantastic. So you have a list of 4 or 5 tests which can give you the maximum bang for buck. So there are a couple of questions. I think we'll take a little break here. Sure. I have a couple of wonderful questions for you, and these are more for my personal interest. But sure, let's see what the people are asking us. So, this is a very interesting question. How do we know what test the patient should be take? And general health checkup. So you're recommending that people should not do any general health checkup, or what are you recommending, Om?
I think people need to be
I'm going to put you in spot.
Yeah, no, I'm for general health checkup. I'm against a battery of investigations being done out of random for everybody. That is what I'm against. One size fits all. No, that doesn't work, right? I cannot, if you go to a restaurant and you are given the whole menu and you're given a sample of everything, right? It doesn't work, right? I mean, and you're asked to pay for it. I mean, if it was free, great. I would love to sample everything in the menu, but I'm paying for it, right? At the end of the day, you're paying for it, and really, you're not satiated at the end of the meal. You never did not enjoy your meal. What's the point, right? So same way, what I'm against is a battery of investigation done randomly in everybody without a consideration for what is probably right or wrong. I think the better thing would be, instead of getting everything done and going to a doctor, go to your doctor first. Could be a family doctor, could be your endocrinologist, could be your physician, could be anybody whom you are seeing who has the knowledge about preventive healthcare. You go to that person and then ask them for suggestions of which test for you is really going to help you. He can, of course, he or she can measure your blood pressure. He can he can do a physical examination and then suggest you a specific test which will be useful to you as far as prevention is concerned. And that will actually save you more money and as well as time. And one sort of unwritten thing, there is now a terminology in radiology which is known as incidentaloma, right? Incidentaloma, right? That means you just did some test randomly and you found something there, and now you are in the mess of what this is and what you're going to do with it, right? For example, somebody does a CT scan of the abdomen to look for something else and finds an adrenal mass, right? अब इसका क्या करें, right? तो और टेस्ट कराओ, फिर सर्जरी कराओ, फिर नहीं कराओ, right? So that's the problem, So instead of that, and that probably, a thyroid, but it's very common. You have, you do a thyroid ultrasound, and out of 110 people will have a thyroid nodule. Yeah. And most people will live with their entire life having a thyroid nodule, right? And if you do see all these autopsies done in the past, a lot of these people had thyroid nodule and they lived their life comfortably. In fact, a lot of these people actually also had thyroid cancer and they lived their entire life and died because of heart problem, not the cancer, right? Sometimes you have these problems, right? We do an overdiagnosis, and if you do an overdiagnosis, you end up with new problems, right? So you're creating new problems instead of solving them. So I think the idea is how, what test to do. I would say if you have a doctor whom you go to, whom you visit, whom your family visits, or who understands you, has been in touch with you, I think such doctor would be able to recommend more specific tests rather than getting a battery of tests done and falling prey to a sort of a new business which is being generated there.
So one of the questions is around this only. That some tests done individually are more expensive than packages. That is why people are going for packages. And what can be the intention of people doing these packages? I think it's just to give a comfort that your whole body is getting checked. I think that's around it.
There is also an unwritten, unseen thing. I'll just tell you sort of behind the hood interpretation. How labs work. You have one. Let's say there is a platform. There's an ELISA platform, and I want to do a thyroid function test for that platform. I buy a kit for the thyroid function test. Now, that kit has, let's say, 100 tests, right? And the kit has an expiry date. Okay. So let's say in next 3 months, the kit is going to expire. So in the next 3 months, if I do 10 tests, I already paid for the kit, right? If I do just 10 tests, the kit will still expire at the end of 3 months, right? And at the end of 3 months, I'll have to buy another set of 100 tests anyways, right? Instead of that, let me put it in a package. So I'm thinking from a pathologist point of view, which is perfect, makes business sense, right? Instead of that, let me offer you a package where anyway my kit is going to expire in a few days, right? मेरे तो पैसे ऐसे भी जाने वाले हैं, right? I'm anyways going to, it's going to go waste. Instead, why not, Arvinder is my friend, why not do a thyroid function test as a added package to the test, right? This is what happens. That a lot of the times, the labs buy kits, right? Which are anyways going to, if they use it, great. If they don't use it, still they're going to pay for it, right? So that's the problem, right? And some of these commonly done tests, right, they often come as available kits, right, in hundreds and 200s and all these specifications, and you have to use it, right? And then they would be ready to give it to you, literally free of charge. If you see these tests, these packages, they're literally free of charge. So that's what, I think everybody understands that, anything given as a package, there is something there, and it's not all fair game, right? There is some
there's no,
and I think as Indians, you understand this, right? I mean, if 1 + 1,
but we still fall for it. We
What?
still fall for it because, you say 100 tests you're getting for 900 rupees versus 3 tests for 900 rupees. I'll go for more tests. The marketing thing also, which is pretty attractive to.
Correct. So I think, in that sense, if you talk about cost, you see the direct cost, but if you see the indirect cost, you are wasting money of 100 tests, only 5 of them are useful for you, right? The other 95 are not going to be useful to you, right? So you're paying money for that other 95 tests. It may not be a big amount, but still you're paying for it, right? You're still paying money for it. Instead of you get the 5 tests done, which are necessary for you, and get a 6th test done, which is something else, which is again useful for you, right? So instead of just falling into a blind package of investigations, get tests done which are smart and specific for your age, and I think that is more useful.
And we should make an algorithm where people can come in, put in their age, their gender, their BMI, their family history, and then we suggest a battery of tests to them.
Correct. So I think, that's already been tried by a lot of people. There are companies working on that. But like I said, AI is going to change that. I mean, if I know your genomics, if I know your family history, if I know, your previous data available, if I've done certain other investigations for you in the past, if I have all this data, probably a computer algorithm can predict which are the other future tests you should be doing, right? Considering, your demographic, your age, your other risk factors and so on. I think, that's going to happen in future, and you are going to have these preventive tests being data driven, being AI driven. But till that comes, it's going to come, but it's going to take a while.
To use actual intelligence.
Till then you will use actual intelligence or a doctor's intelligence, which might be, useful.
So a couple of lateral questions, but we'll still take them. These are specifically for you, Om. How effective is yoga and pranayam for controlling hypertension and cholesterol and triglycerides? This is from Naitik.
Okay. Can we club those? Right now we're just doing a diagnostic part. Let's discuss the treatment aspect, in a few minutes. So I think, we can take the diagnostic questions now and take the treatment questions in. We can kind of, club all those things together.
Sure. All right. So then how do we get to this basic, because people are looking for a guidance, like if they're of a certain age or they're of a certain gender or they have a family history, how do they get started about the preventive health checkup? So what's the basic guideline which you can give them so that they can go and discuss with their doctor and, say ask about those tests. So these 4 tests you mentioned, I think everybody has written down.
Yeah.
So how would you advise our viewers to go around that?
Okay, so let me start with an older age and then go back to a younger age.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect.
So let's start at an elderly group of people, right? So women above 65, men and women above 65. Of course, they are not considered elderly now, but at a
WHO
kind
says
of a,
above 85.
yeah, relatively elder, right?
Yeah.
Relatively older generation people who are actually very active these days, and they are so that group of patient, I think the key test, apart from the heart and kidney, which we already discussed and which will further elaborate in a few minutes, one test you should really check for is known as osteoporosis. The bones become weak, right? It's eventuality. It's about time. It's not that it's going to happen. So all women above the age of 65 and all men above the age of 70 should be tested for osteoporosis, which is a simple. It's like an X-ray. It's known as a BMD DEXA scan, which is available in a lot of these radiology centers and a lot of these hospitals. It's available. It hardly takes 20-30 minutes to do. It gives you insight about the strength of your bone. And, believe you me, osteoporosis kills more women as much as breast cancer does, right? Yet we have so much, we have pink ribbons for breast cancer, and we have Australian cricketers wearing pink t-shirts for, breast cancer awareness. And you have celebrities talking about it. You have nobody talking about osteoporosis, which kills as many women as breast cancer does. And it takes just one simple test to sort of pick it up. And then, of course, if you have osteoporosis, simple medications, a few medications or perhaps other treatment options can really help you. So that is as far as the older age is concerned, right?
Yeah.
So women above 65 and men above 70. So if you have, somebody, maybe your parents, that's something you shouldn't miss out, right? And it's a big thing in the West. Unfortunately, you're not sort of in India, that concept of osteoporosis prevention or fracture prevention is not still, taken up. Then, of course, going to a slightly again, that group of patients are also will have eyesight issues, so all the other things, of course, you need to get that checked. Coming to the slightly younger age group. So if you talk about postmenopausal women or men of that similar age group, again, risk factors being heart problem being the primary. We already talked about a CT calcium score, but apart from that, a lipid profile, right? Again, common misconception, lipid profile, it's not necessary to do a lipid profile in a fasting state. Common misconception. A lipid profile, even the guidelines now, the American Heart Association clearly says they don't need a fasting lipid profile. As a screening test, you can do a lipid profile in mid-afternoon or whatever time you want, right? Doesn't matter. Only thing is, there is one parameter within the lipid panel, which is a triglyceride, which the fasting and post meal value often differs. The LDL value, the non-HDL value, all these things don't matter too much as far as if it's fasting or not. The triglyceride matters, but having said that, the guidelines also now say that if the triglyceride is more than 400, then you need to repeat it in a fasting state. But as long as it is less than 400, the interpretation remains the same whether it's a fasting or non-fasting, right? So again, lipid profile is something you should consider doing, because still, despite the CT calcium score sort of trumping the lipid profile per se, lipid profile also gives you a lot of insights about the person. Especially, I think triglyceride, unfortunately, that's not interpreted too strongly. I think triglyceride gives you a lot of information. Apart from the heart, it also, those people who have high triglyceride, they are at a higher risk of developing diabetes and the liver problem which you talked about, that is NASH or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right? So again, if you have high triglyceride, your doctor might ignore it, but I think you should insist upon the fact that, what can I do to help it? And, a high triglyceride in a non-diabetic individual, all you need to do is lose 10% of your weight. I think Fitterfly can help you, right? So, lose 10%, may perhaps reset to 23 kg per meter square rate, but at least, lose 10%. I think that really reduces your triglyceride. High, again, contrary to what people perceive, triglyceride actually increases with higher carb meal. So again, carb intake, if you reduce, again, triglycerides tend to be better. So that is for the age. We already talked about the kidney, and we already talked about the liver, right? So these are other things you already have to consider. Let me then go to even a younger age group, that is adolescents and children. I think that's again a group which is ignored completely, right? And not that I'm suggesting any battery of tests if your child is an adolescent. I'll just tell you to look at one thing, right? So check the neck, just behind the neck, right, on the sides of the neck, right? You can check these photographs on Google. The condition is known as acanthosis nigricans, right? That is darkening of the skin behind your neck and the sides of the neck. It's a black velvety appearance, right? Just if you have your kid around, just ask them to bend and look at the neck, right? And if you have that, and it's very common in peripubertal age group when their hormones are being secreted. If you have the dark skin, darkening of the skin, that is the essential sign of insulin resistance. And if the kid has that, that kid is going to develop diabetes unless in future, maybe in the next 10 years, if nothing is being done to intervene that. And if the kid has that, it's a good time then to consider lifestyle measures, exercise. Maybe the 10th mark is not going to be as important as their future risk of diabetes, right? So insist upon more physical activity. I think it's going away. Unfortunately, I've seen kids, you ask them when, I mean, I was not a very active kid, but at least I did more exercise than these kids are doing these days. And with this lockdown, I think they're all indoors, they're having their classes on Zoom, almost no physical activity. I think it's that's one of the unfortunate thing, of this pandemic again. So I think these are some of the things you can look for. Of course, beyond that, you might have specific risks depending on your family risk factor, like heart diseases, maybe cancer, certain familial cancers, and so on. I think these are the things you can additionally test. But I think these are broadly what you should consider testing, right? Sort of a bare minimum framework we should consider testing. And if you find any problem, of course, it would be a good opportunity to intervene.
I would, that's wonderful information. For kids and adolescents, I would also recommend that they chart the BMI.
Yeah.
And check for the BMI rise
Yeah.
above the range, and that's another
Absolutely.
important thing. Do you have any views about waist hip ratios in adults, and
Yeah.
how to use
Yeah.
them
So
in particular
again,
for-
yeah, I'll just finish this point. You have BMI charts available from Indian. You can go to Indian Academy of Pediatrics
Oh, it's
website.
available in the Fitterfly app also now.
Yeah, great. So I think fantastic. So I think I think you should measure your BMI and yours, and of course your child's. Your child's would vary according to the age. Of course for adults it is standardized, but for children it may vary according to the age. So you need to check whether your child falls into a higher range or not. I think that's very, very important. And simple. So you're not even doing a test. You're not pricking your child at all. You're just still finding out vital information for your child. As far as the what was the other question? Sorry,
Waist hip ratio.
Yeah, the waist hip ratio, right? I would say just the waist circumference, not even the ratio, right? You just look at the waist circumference. Simple thing to do, right? In fact, if you see the size of the pants, I think there should be a label there that above 36. If you're asking, perhaps you should have free a kind of card to meet a doctor or something like that. I think
No, actually,
package deal if you talk about.
Amazon and at Shoppers Stop, anybody buying 36, they should be offered a free HbA1c test.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. I think that is, that is
And
the
a city
package I think
calcium score.
yes, that's a package I'm really looking for in future. But I think, the waist circumference is a very important diagnostic tool, because again, just like this acanthosis I talked about, the waist circumference is also a marker of what is known as metabolic syndrome, which is also a marker of insulin resistance, which is again a marker of future risk of diabetes. So again, for Asians, if you Google it, you'll find different values because those values are for Caucasians. For Asians, if the waist circumference is more than 90 centimeters in men, which is about 36 inches, and more than 32 inches in women, there is about 80 centimeters in women, then that's considered to be on the higher side. So you don't even need to measure the ratio, just a simple waist circumference. And if it's on the higher side, again, you are at a risk of developing, you are already perhaps having insulin resistance, but again, having future risk of developing diabetes.
Perfect. I think one of the people have asked about a pre-diabetes risk calculator. So Om, I don't know if you're aware, last week we launched a pre-diabetes risk calculator, which is India's pre-diabetes risk calculator. It's available on, I'll just show my screen also, I think just to show to people. So it's a simple, as Om had said, it is a test which is like you don't need to prick or anything. You can just go to fitterfly.com/pre-diabetes-risk calculator. And you can just go and attempt this calculator here. I can just do it for myself and show what kind of report I get. So do you have parents or brothers or sisters have diabetes? So I have, of course, a lot of family members having diabetes. Have you been diagnosed with high blood pressure? No. What's your age? I'm of course in the age group of 40 to 49. The risk of type 2 diabetes increases with age. Which of the following describe your ethnicity? Indian origin. As Om said, South Asians anyway fall into a very high risk category. Do you exercise at least 150 minutes a week? Now, with a hand on my heart, I can tell that I do this. So I'll click this yes. And are you a man or a woman? Of course, this is fine. Let's calculate your body mass index. So 5'8". My weight in kgs is 67. So I have a low risk of pre-diabetes, and immediately I'll get this report on my email, which tells me all the guidelines and all these things come to me in the email, which I can see how I'm doing on the pre-diabetes. So I'll advise anybody who wants to know more about this and about BMI, they can just log on to pre-diabetes risk calculator and understand how this works. This is a treasure trove of information here, which people can use there.
Great.
Right.
I think again, what I would suggest, just an add-on, not just knowing is not important, right? It's important to take an action. I think that's the key point. So if your risk is on the higher side, I think, and as data has already suggested, that a good lifestyle, right? And losing 10% of your weight, it's not much. I mean, if you're, let's say, 90 kg, that's 9 kgs. 9 kgs is not much, right? It's not very difficult. So I think just doing that will reduce your risk by manyfold. I think, and that's if you're a pre-diabetic, and then you don't have to go to your doctor and say that reverse karke dikhao, right? Because I mean, that the pre-diabetes is the right time to intervene. I think that's the best time is that. I think, and after that everything is downhill. So if you are in that range, if you are even a non-invasive risk calculator, if you found that you are at a high risk, it's a good time to kind of be kind of a wake-up call. And you have, of course, services like Vitafly which help you to live a better life, I think, and that should really be taken into.
Absolutely. So let's now go back to the should we take some audience questions? Can you see them on this?
So now let's discuss the what you should do, right? Since we sort of segued into the topic, I think what are the things you can do to live a better life? I think that's the key point. And I just at the top of my head, I'll just list a few, and of course we'll then take the questions from the audience, and then you can see how they would really like to know. So I think and I think we talked about this yesterday also, smoking is very important, right? So I think a lot of people don't realize that the risk of heart, if you take heart attack as the final endpoint, smoking will bring you to that heart attack as fast as diabetes will bring you to that heart attack, right? So we make all the efforts, we spend a lot of money, we use expensive medications, consult brilliant doctors, and use a lot of services like Vitafly to control our diabetes. We do all that. The risk reduction is similar to what you would achieve by quitting smoking, right? So I'm not saying you don't control diabetes. That absolutely must be done, right? But besides that, you should also make equal efforts to quit smoking if you're already doing that. And somehow if you talk to any doctor who works in that field, who knows about smokers, Indian, somehow the vessels, somehow the smoke, the nicotine or whatever it is, we don't know. Indian smokers tend to be worse compared to all the other smokers across the world, right? You have a lot of people tell me that the oldest French woman in the world lived long and she smoked all her life. Fine. I mean, her vessels are better. Mine is not. Yours are not, right? I think so. At the end of the day, I think quitting smoking is something which I feel is as important as controlling your diabetes, right? Second, if you are pre-diabetic, if you have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, if you have triglycerides which are high, lose weight, not much, 10%, right? Keep that as a magic number. Just 10% of.
And how much time would you give it? Like 3 months?
About 6 months. So 10 kg, 10% in 6 months. So, for anybody, I would be average about 10 kgs in 6 months, which will be about 1 or 2 kgs in a month. I think it's not difficult, right? I mean, anybody could do it, and that itself, will reduce your risk significantly. But the difficult part is, I think it's easier said than done, but the difficult part.
It.
So the body then tries to, so if you've done that, if you reach that step of losing 10% of your weight, make more efforts to maintain that level for the next year, right? One of those who puts, kind of, New Year resolutions. I think first New Year resolution should be to lose 10% of your weight. The next New Year resolution should be to maintain that weight before you lose anything further.
Well, New Year is
Let
a
the body.
that should be the
That's right,
resolution
exactly.
for all of us.
Yes. So I think, and how you do it, you could use different strategies, diet, exercise, everything works, right? So all these things has to be taken into account. And I think that should be your ultimate game, to lose 10% of your weight. That's very simple, simple arithmetic, and you can do that, right? So that's the second sort of broad advice I would give you. Uh, Third broad advice, again, as a general sort of a blanket advice, exercise, right? But I'm not talking about high intensity gym and all that. Even simple. So whatever you're doing now, do a little more. That's it, right? Start with that, and then it becomes better, right? If exercise becomes part of your daily life, then just like eating food or watching television or watching a series on Netflix or whatever, that has now become part of life. You never knew it, right? You never knew that every night before you go to sleep, you watch one episode of one of your favorite television series. Netflix has been around for just a few years now, right? But it's now become a part of your life. You can't do without it. Same way, it's not very difficult to make exercise as a part of your life. And if you do it every day, few minutes, start with a few minutes, keep increasing, it becomes a part of your life. And then someday you're not exercising, you feel like kuch to nahi kiya, something is missing here.
That's absolutely right.
So that that's what you need to do. I'm not saying your New Year resolution should be to go to a gym. No, don't pay for the gym fee. Your New Year resolution would be that I walk for 10 minutes every day. From tomorrow, I'm going to walk for 20 minutes every day. Right? Incremental, small incremental things. And that also, once it becomes part of your life and done for a long time, sustained over a time, that is the one which actually benefits people more, rather than doing something for a while and then stopping it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the studies are showing that a person who's minimally active throughout the day is better off than 1 hour of gymming and sedentary for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
So there are studies which absolutely show this. So that's a wonderful. So one of the tricks which you can use which I used on myself to get more physically active, is I used to prepare my gym bag, shoes and socks, and keep it next to my bed, so that when I get up in the morning, I don't have a choice.
Correct.
So once I got into that for like 1 year, after that I didn't need that anymore. So that was one of the tricks. Fill up the water bottle, fill up the gym bag, and keep it next to you, so that.
Yeah. So I think if you read this book, Atomic Habits, right, by James Clear, it's one of the things. So if you want to inculcate a new habit, make it attractive, make it easy. Have less friction, right?
Yeah.
So if your gym is closer to your home, it's better, right? Closer the better. It may not be a fancy gym, right? If it's closer, the better, right? Any friction that comes in the way, if you eliminate that, things become much easier.
Absolutely right. What next? So 3 great advice. What else is there for us?
Okay, now let's take the audience what they want to do.
Sure. So can you see the questions, or should I ask you?
Yeah, you can just pick and choose. And
So earlier question was around how effective is yoga and pranayam for controlling hypertension and cholesterol?
Yeah. So like I said, any form of physical activity, including yoga and any kind of which kind of burns the fuel, right? I would say, including pranayam, including it's going to help, right? It is definitely going to reduce, your sympathetic nervous system is going to be calmed down, right? You are going to oxygenate better. It is going to help, right? It does the same as a intensity exercise would. But my only thing is, this is one of the problems which a lot of people have, and I think this is one common myth again. It is not all or none. Okay, so it's not that if you are diabetic and your HbA1c is 10 or something, it's not that you do pranayam and yoga and that alone is enough. No, right? That is an add-on to your existing treatment. Okay, so you need medicines, fine. You need insulin, fine, and plus you do yoga and pranayam, right? So it's not all or none. That is one of the common problems, right? People, they say I'm taking up yoga, so I'm stopping my medicines. No, it doesn't work that way, right? It's an add-on. Okay, it's added on to it's like going into a war where you say that I'm going to send my air force, so I'm going to withdraw my army. No, it's not going to happen. Both need to be there, right? At some point, of course, you'll start withdrawing both. But at some, when the fight is on, you want the best people out there, right? You want everything there. So that's the idea, right? So diabetes is still a battle, right? You're still fighting it. You're fighting against your own body, which is the most difficult part. And in that case, all the weapons you have, use it, right? Whatever weapon you have, use it. Don't hold back, right? So if yoga works, great, you should use it. There is data for that, right? But again, it's not in isolation. It has to be with the other treatment, which is already there.
Perfect. So Reshmi has asked a question: is tracking BMI relevant? My visceral fat, as per weighing scale and DEXA, classify me as obese, but BMI is normal. What does that
Yeah,
say
I
about
think
my risk for diabetes?
it's a very smart question, I'll tell you. It's a question which Indians need to ask more often. Unfortunately, BMI, it's a very old system. It was there. There's some Austrian guy who mathematician who actually came, Quintel or something, who actually came up with the BMI concept. Uh, Unfortunately, data has now progressed so much that we know more about the metabolism than just BMI. And BMI works very well for Caucasians. It definitely works because in them, the BMI correlates very well with the visceral fat. But Indians, as you know, this concept of YY paradox. If you've not heard it, just Google that. There are two doctors who are sitting side by side. One is a Russian Caucasian, one is an Indian. Okay, both have the same BMI. But when the DEXA was done, the Indian doctor had a higher visceral fat compared to the Caucasian one, right? With the same BMI. So Indians tend to be lean obese, right? So we are leaner, yet our visceral fat is more. The corollary to that, absolute opposite to that is, let's say, sumo wrestlers. Sumo wrestlers are very healthy. They look unhealthy, but they are very, very healthy because they have more subcutaneous fat and lesser visceral fat. If you calculate the BMI, it's going to be off the roof, right? But they are more healthy than you and me, right? So the point being is that you are definitely right that visceral fat is the one which is definitely a better marker of diabetes and metabolic and cardiovascular risk compared to BMI. But there are two challenges. A, we still don't have a perfect system of measuring visceral fat. There are a lot of debates there. The ones which you use in your gym, right, which is a bioimpedance method, it's not perfect, right? A lot of flaws in that. The better method is to use a DEXA, which I think you rightly used, which is a better method. Even better, there are certain CT scan protocols which you can do. Of course, that will inculcate an extra radiation risk, which I think it's not necessary to kind of face that. So idea is, till we get the best method for measuring visceral fat, and then we correlate that with the cardiovascular or other risk factors, I think till then we are still at the mercy of the existing system, which is BMI. But I think as Indian doctors and those who are listening to this, scientists who are listening to this, general public, if you're listening to this, I think it's very important to be India-centric. And South Asians, we need to kind of spend more money, spend more time, spend more efforts to research the correlation of visceral fat and to find the best technique for measuring visceral fat and to then correlate with the cardiovascular risk. I think there is some money well spent. I think a lot of in Western countries there are a lot of research which is driven from patients' motivation, right, or a patient group motivation. The group of type 1 diabetics would enforce a research done on insulin pumps or on artificial pancreas. Same way, I think as Indians we need to somewhere wake up to this and don't just rely on doctors and scientists to
Do something for you. You should
do
take
something for yourself, right? You should take the initiative. I think that works.
That's wonderful. I was reading about the James Lind Alliance, that what is the number one priority from the patient's perspective? It's diabetes reversal.
Yeah.
Roy Taylor's article, wonderful article. So there's another question about, Om, just coming back to that question, would you recommend doing a in-body body composition analysis or any kind of body composition analysis, though it might not be accurate, it may be 95% accurate, but at a risk population, would you recommend doing that just to get some idea about body fat?
I don't recommend the bioimpedance method, even though some of these companies offer things which are much better. According to claims, if you see the data, bioimpedance is extremely unreliable. The test you should do is again a DEXA, right? Which I think some the audience already asked. Yeah. So DEXA is a much more standardized test. Again, it's just one software, and that software is already there. Just that the technician may not be aware, or you're not asked for it, right? If you have any DEXA machine, which also measures, like we already discussed, the bone mineral density, it also measures the body composition. There is a lot of data for that, and that data is very useful also to correlate with your risk, right? So again, if you want to do a test, again, it doesn't cost too much, right? If you want to do a test, instead of using bioimpedance, it's better to go to the radiology center and ask for a body composition analysis using DEXA.
DEXA.
That's useful, right?
Perfect. So Gangadhara has asked a question. Age is 59, diabetic for 20 years, cholesterol. He's taking a medicine. What are the routine tests he should undergo?
Okay, CD calcium score, HbA1c, lipid profile. I think you already have that, right? Urine albumin creat ratio, serum creatinine. Itna karao.
Awesome.
Bare minimum.
Awesome. So there's a question from Anjali. Can taking regular calcium or vitamin D supplements help prevent osteoporosis or delay the onset?
Yeah. So calcium and vitamin D supplements are definitely recommended in postmenopausal women and older men, right? Generally above the age of 55, 60, right? It is necessary because their calcium requirement, because the bone is breaking down and their calcium requirement is higher compared to premenopausal women or younger men. Younger men and women generally require about 400 milligram of calcium a day, which you can get from one glass of milk and one bowl of dahi. That is enough, right? One glass of milk is 200 milligram of calcium. That's enough, right? So you have just 2 glasses of milk or one dahi and one milk. That's fine. You get enough calcium. But if you're older, your requirement is as much as 1000 to 1200 milligram, which you will not get from your routine diet. So you need to take calcium supplements. You need to take vitamin D. Having said that, that is prevention of osteoporosis. It doesn't guarantee it, right? You still need to screen yourself for osteoporosis, and it definitely reduces the risk of you having osteoporosis. And if you have osteoporosis, all the more reason for you to take it. At the same time, that is not the only test or not the only treatment which is necessary enough for all people with osteoporosis. So if you have osteoporosis, and this is again orthopedic surgeons also need to understand is the treatment of osteoporosis is not just vitamin D and calcium. Vitamin D and calcium is just the basis of it, right? You're just providing raw materials. You need to build a building on that raw material. It's just like, cement to hai. Building banana padega, right? So it's not just cement which is enough, right? You need the bricks, you need the manpower, you need everything, right? So osteoporosis treatment goes beyond just calcium and vitamin D. There are other things also which are involved in that process.
So what are the tests to be done to diagnose if there's any underlying medical condition based on weight of a person? For example, underweight, would the test be different from an overweight person? This is asked by Niti.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we already discussed that, Indians tend to be leaner. And if you're leaner, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are not at a risk of diabetes. That's the reality, right? Lean people who apparently look very lean may have a very high visceral fat. That's an Indian phenotype, right? And you might have a very high visceral fat, and your risk of diabetes may be higher than somebody who looks apparently obese, right? That's the challenge, right? So again, obviously a body composition analysis would give us more detailed insights into that. Until it becomes a regular practice, I think you should consider testing yourself for the same investigation as some obese person does, especially if you have a family history of diabetes or other disorders in your family, right? And it's wrong to say that, of course, there are healthy lean people. There are lean people who are very healthy, great. But then a lot of these lean people are not necessarily healthy, right? They would still have fatty liver. They still have that's the paradox in India. Caucasians. You go ask the American doctor, he'll say, yes. How does it happen? They will not understand. For them, diabetes is only obese people, right? But unfortunately, in India, we have a completely different phenotype. And if you're lean, you're still at a risk. Doesn't exempt you from the risk.
Perfect. So there's a very high funder question about accumulation of advanced glycation end products in diabetes, cardiovascular disease. How can we test for AGE and do nutraceuticals help? This is by Reshmi.
Yeah. So I think, AGEs are what ultimately leads to the diabetes related complications, right? So what we talk about, your retina, your, kidney problem, your, nerves being involved. All these things are because of, and to a section part of, because of advanced glycosylated end products, right? Now, there are certain tests which are being developed, but they're still not standardized for actually measuring the AGE. Rather, in most cases, we assume that if your HbA1c is high, because that is what data has already shown, if your HbA1c is high, your likelihood of having advanced glycosylated end products are high, and in corollary, your risk of complications are higher. So your glycemic control, your blood sugar control, is an indirect surrogate of the risk of having advanced AGEs. And I think that itself is probably, I would say, till we have a better test to diagnose it, at this point of time, you should consider your glycemic control, your blood sugar control, as a corollary, as a surrogate for the risk of having the advanced glycosylated end products and the risk of subsequent complications.
There's a question from Reshmi also about measuring insulin resistance.
Oh, I'm very against that. I'm very against measuring because see those tests which are you measure the insulin, the HOMA IR and all that. These tests are generally being done for epidemiological purposes. They are not designed for individual risk purposes. Rather, if you want to see if you are insulin resistant, just measure your waist circumference. That is enough. That is one. If you want something more, get your lipid profile and look at your triglyceride. If you want something more, ask your doctor to look for acanthosis nigricans. If you want something more, you can get an ultrasound done or a liver function test or SGPT done to look for fatty liver. If you have fatty liver, you are having insulin resistance. If you have PCOS, you have this is I see women with PCOS, gynecologists asking for insulin resistance. Boss, PCOS itself is insulin resistance. तुम्हें और क्या टेस्ट चाहिए? भगवान ही खुद कह रहे हैं कि इसको इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस है, तो तुमको टेस्ट देके प्रूव क्या करना है? What do you want to prove by it? It's already there, right? So the PCOS itself is insulin resistance. Fatty liver itself is insulin resistance. Diabetes, pre-diabetic itself is insulin resistance. High triglyceride itself is insulin resistance. Having skin changes, acanthosis nigricans itself is insulin resistance. You don't need any specific test for that, right?
Awesome, wonderful.
Spend money on preventing and progressing instead of getting useless tests done is not going to help you because it's already there, right?
Awesome. Does increase in HSCRP, cardiac marker, denote future health problem?
Yeah, HSCRP
has asked this, Dr. Sri Lakshmi Karupati.
Yeah, again, good question. Yes, definitely HSCRP was in a lot of vogue when I think I was doing my MD. There's a lot of people did a lot of their thesis on HSCRPs and carotid edema media thickness and so on. There are a lot of these other tests. There's a lot of tests in cardiology, right? The only thing is now you have the CT calcium score actually giving you more information and more better predictive analysis than HSCRP, than lipoprotein A levels, then ApoB levels. There's so many of them, right? There's still a lot of huge tests. Maybe in intricate details, if certain patients would whether to increase the statin dose, whether to not, certain situations we often HSCRP is useful. But I think at this point of time, I would probably consider CT calcium score to be a better marker at this point, with of course the data available, that better marker and better sort of predictive tool than HSCRP and all these risk calculators, Framinghouse risk calculator, a lot of them, there are n number of that. This one test kind of is simpler and much more predictive than other things.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll take the last two questions because we're already, I think, ahead of time, and then I'll ask you to summarize your message. So a 60-year-old man with 10 years, over 10 years maintaining weight at 60 kgs, 67-year-old now, diabetes mellitus for 15 years, serum creatinine of 1.4, very scared of eating properly because of various conflicting data. How does one recognize that creatinine is due to kidney disorder or not due to muscle wastage?
Well, either case, you will have to get it correct, right? That's the point. You don't want the disease to progress, right? How would you know whether it's because of diabetes? It's very simple. You do a urine albumin creat ratio, right? Urine microalbumin. If your urine microalbumin, the value 30 is the cutoff. It's more than 30. It's likely because of diabetes, right? Again, see, even kidney disease is multifactorial. It's not just one thing which is causing it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. A lot of people have a unidimensional thinking. ये इसके वजह से, ये BP के वजह से, नहीं, ऐसा नहीं होता. If you have high blood pressure, if you have diabetes, if you have muscle wasting, all of the three would contribute, and dehydration and something else, and some medications, everything will contribute to your high creatinine. It's not just one factor, right? So to answer your question specifically, I would say get a urine albumin creat ratio done. But the point beyond it is that, need to maintain good glycemic control, need to maintain, good blood pressure control. All these things need to be done to prevent your disease from, creatinine from 1.4 to going to, 2 or 3, right, in future. And again, just for the audience to know, absolute value of creatinine just generally does not make too much sense. What you need to do is go online, check for eGFR calculator, that is estimated GFR. GFR is the functioning of your kidney, right? Just like, you do echo 40% functioning, 30% functioning, all that, so on and so forth. Just need to go Google eGFR, put your values there. You need your creatinine value, you need your age, you need your weight, all this, and sex. That's all you need. Just put this in, you'll get a value, something like 30, 40, 50, whatever, right? That value is what is your estimated GFR. Normal estimated GFR is about 120. Anything above 90 is fine, right? Anything below 90 is various stages of chronic kidney disease. Less than 30 is considered end stage renal disease. 30 to 60, where I think 1.4 will probably fit into 30 to 60, around 45, I would say. That is, one stage beyond, one stage above end stage renal disease, right? So what your goal should be to, instead of either stay there or improve your category and not go into end stage renal disease. That's the idea.
Professor Swati, you got your answer. I think EGFR calculation should be done rather than
Yeah.
a simple 1.4, and also urine albumin creatinine ratio. So this is the last question. Is it possible to reduce HbA1c level of 7 by just lifestyle modification and physical activity? And this is along with fatty liver and PCOD. This is from Amrita.
Okay, so this is where it brings me to the point which I raised earlier. When you are in a battle, right, you want to use all your resources which are available to you, right? Not just selectively use certain resources and then lose the war, and then, right? For example, let's say, agar तुम्हारे कुछ like problem hai, if you have a problem, you call your friends, you call your family members, you call your neighbors, you take everybody's help, right? If you're in a big soup financial problem, whatever problem, right? You use all the resources you have to get out of this problem, right? So if your HbA1c is 7, and this is what data is also shown, and this is the general philosophy which all the doctors, all the patients as well as doctors need to understand. Diabetes is best treated when it is treated aggressively early on. That's the best chance for reversal. That's the best chance for preventing future complications. That's the best chance for living a more healthy, longer life, right? So if you are having an HbA1c of 7 with other PCOS and so on and so forth, your best approach is to attack at all fronts: diet, exercise, medications, better sleep, everything. You need to use all the resources which are there at this point of time. Bring your HbA1c down to 5.7, 5.8, and then you start withdrawing things. Then you stop your medicines. Then you can perhaps, take a little leniency as far as workout is concerned. Then perhaps, you could have perhaps a few days, cheat days for your diet. But till you reach that goal, use all the resources available at your end and try to reach that.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a wonderful question. Now, just to finish this, I'm going to share something which I did for myself and which worked out really well for me. So last year I was diagnosed to have pre-diabetes, and how I was diagnosed, I had a couple of episodes of hypoglycemia in the gym, and once I was taken to the casualty in emergency van because I just fainted during workout. So I put on a continuous glucose device on myself, and this was my graph, which was not too bad actually. It showed some peaks of blood sugars after breakfast and after lunch and post dinner. But what we did was create a software where we could understand the glycemic responses to each of the foods which I was eating. So this is like when I ate something healthy, my blood sugar remained between 70 to 140. But with starchy maida kind of thing, my blood sugars went up. And these readings were different for me and for my wife. Her blood sugar never went above 130 even with Maggie, but my blood sugar just went short up. Similarly with white bread, which I thought always was bread is healthy, but with bread, my blood sugar always used to rise above 150 and then fall below 70. This happened every time I ate bread. So after doing this analysis on Fitterfly app, I realized which are the things which were good for me. I made a lot of changes to my food and nutrition. I started intermittent fasting once or twice a week. I instituted a regimen of exercises which included weight training, running, aerobic, muscle building, and all those things. And with this, my HbA1c has come down from 6.2 to 5.5. I've lost 2 kgs. I was never overweight. With the next CGMS, my improvement in glycemic response also occurred, and I feel I'm sleeping also much better. So I realized the top 5 foods which were contributing to the rise of blood sugar, and I think the latest research is also showing the foods which are showing a higher glycemic response in a person. They are the ones which lead to fat deposition and higher chances of fatty liver and also rise in triglycerides. So if we can figure out those foods which are high glycemic response for a person, they can really help the people design their food plan or diet plan much better. So towards this, we are running this program, which is a 3-month program for pre-diabetes. I will strongly urge people with pre-diabetes to join this program, where we put a CGMS device, we calculate the personalized glycemic responses, we calculate the glycemic variabilities. We, as Om said, we also talk about, what is the nutrition which they're getting, and then we help them with sleep, stress, and we nudge people throughout this program so that they can actually understand what is the right kind of lifestyle required so that you don't progress from pre-diabetes to diabetes. Now, the data from UKPDS and also from Finnish studies shows that if you do a proper lifestyle intervention, then pre-diabetes has almost a 60%, 58% chances that it won't progress
Yeah.
to diabetes. Now, with the availability of corporate health checkups and a lot of people getting pre-diabetes test done, I think it cannot be ignored anymore. And you also talked about it, that people
Yeah.
come with this big file. The HbA1c is 6.2, 6.3, but nobody has done anything about it. That is the unfortunate part. So I will like to end with a very important question, Om. So suppose you get a person with diabetes coming to your clinic. Do they ask about their children risk also? And how do you address that question?
Yeah, I think they come with the children. So the children ask for the risk. But just before that, look, I got my own CGM, right? I'm going to do what you're doing, right?
Fantastic.
So yeah, I think it's the program which you guys have developed, I think it's very useful uh, for both pre-diabetic as well as diabetic patients. I think it works for both. And yes, I'm very much for personalized nutrition. I think, see, not I mean, you have people talking about, I do keto and I do this and that. Look, every person is different and their metabolic response to food is different, right? So what you need is a coach. You don't need a blanket diet guideline, or you don't need a one size make तुमको चार्ट बना के दे दिया बस ऐसे ही फॉलो करो लाइफ लॉन्ग, ऐसा नहीं होता. Every person is different, so I think a personalized nutrition, that is what ultimately Fitterfly is, I think. And that's the thing, and that is what you should, that's the in thing, that's what you should really focus on, right? Having said that, to the question on does a family member have a risk of diabetes and are they concerned? Absolutely they are. And again, it's not just one. Perhaps their grandmother, the mother was diabetic. There's some couple of brothers who are having diabetes. A lot of family members there. They don't want the younger, children in the 30s or the 20s. They don't want them to develop diabetes. And I think that is why they often, at least in our practice, at least before COVID, is to bring the children along so that they would also understand that this is something which needs attention, which needs as much focus as our career does, as our other life focus is concerned. I think health is equally important. I think that makes real sense. So I think yes, they do, and I think we should highly encourage them to do that.
I remember when my dad developed diabetes about 30 years back, and I've seen him struggle throughout the last 30 years, having myocardial infarctions and attacks of hypoglycemia, over medication, everything I've seen in last 30 years. But nobody talked to us about our risk of diabetes because the knowledge about that was 30 years was not so good.
Yeah.
But I think now in your practice, you must be seeing every single diabetic who comes to you. They would be asking about what can they do to help their children,
Yeah.
not get diabetes. And I think one of the attendees also asked that question: what can be done in childhood to prevent diabetes from happening? I think this has been already asked about. You have already answered this about
Yeah.
BMI, checking for acanthosis nigricans, and making sure they're physically active and eating healthy. So I think it all begins in childhood. We all need to stress on this 30% of Indian population which is under 18 years of age and nurture them so that we have lesser risk of pre-diabetes and diabetes in the future. So Om, great session. I would just like you to summarize this and also leave everybody with a take-home message so that they can follow this and stay healthy.
Yeah. So I think just to summarize, there are two aspects I'd like to point out. One, don't go for the blanket of tests which are there. This battery of tests. Be smart. There are smarter predictive analytic tests. Like I said, in future, AI will replace this. But till that, I think it would be a better idea to talk to your doctor and get your personalized risk assessment done. I think this is the overall theme. What is the specific test that you need to do for you, right? What are your risk factors? What are your challenges? And what are the tests which is going to help you? That's the first thing. Again, as far as the treatment aspect is concerned, again, in a similar light, I'll say you need to focus on not what your neighbor is doing, not what your friends are doing, not what your your aunt or your uncle is into. You need to see what works for you, right? And every person is different, right? Your body's response to nutrition is different, your body's response to exercise is different. So what you need to do is get hold of a good coach, and I think that underlying theme here is coaching, right? There's a difference between teaching and practicing medicine and coaching. Coaching is completely different. It's a completely different sphere. We go for tuition classes and coaching for our studies, right? I think we also need, it's equally important to have a coach who is going to help you for your lifestyle and for your diet and for your nutrition. And I think the key point is for all these, I think the solution to this is better coaching, and hopefully, like I said, like I said, India is not equipped to deal with a big crisis of health problems, which is going to we are going to face in the next few years. But we are definitely equipped to prevent it, and I think we have enough resources to do that, to prevent the disease rather than treat it. And I think that should be the ultimate goal of a country. We need to have a more preventive mindset as far as health is concerned. We should start looking at health as an asset and as an investment we should make, rather than just something which is a liability which we are going to face.
Fantastic. Those are wonderful words. And I think we must understand as human beings, our body is on rent and we need to pay it every single day. The moment you don't pay it, that's the time when you get into problems. So wonderful session, Om. Really glad to hear your thoughts about preventive health and after the years of experience. Thanks for sharing all this wisdom with us. Sudipta?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you so much. It was such an insightful discussion, and I think that everyone would have taken something home from this. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope we weren't able to answer a lot of questions, but we will get in touch with people. But great discussion, absolutely amazing discussion, very insightful.
And thanks for taking coaching into the consideration. I personally want to put on record that thanks to all the 45 coaches at Fitterfly who've been doing wonderful work at Fitterfly, helping people out. Thank you, Om, once again. Have a great night ahead. Thank you, Sudipta. Thank you,
Thank you so
Digambar.
much, Bodo. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Good night.